Episode 7, The Space Between Steps.
Scene 1. A choreography broken and breathed through.
The square did not empty all at once, it loosened, voices thinned into murmurs, then into footsteps, then into nothing at all. One by one, the creatures of the dream worlds drifted back toward paths that had always existed but had been forgotten while danger demanded attention. What remained was quiet. And three figures who did not follow: Teddy, Lucy, Thinksy. They stood amid the remains of the machine of forgetting. What had once been a structure of purpose now lay scattered, fractured panels, bent arms, gears stilled mid-intention. The great logic that had promised balance had collapsed into ordinary debris. They did not touch it, they did not touch each other, where once they would have closed ranks instinctively. Shoulders brushing, hands finding sleeves, bodies aligning against threat. They now formed a loose triangle, near enough to be together, far enough to remain separate. The space between them did not ache, it breathed. Teddy broke the stillness first. Not with words, but with motion. He nudged a broken lever with the tip of his boot. It scraped softly across the stone, a dull, unimportant sound. "I was wrong," he said at last, his gaze resting not on the others but on the empty glass chamber beyond the ruins. "My calculations always assumed that order would hold us together." The words carried no defensiveness, no apology, just recognition. Lucy did not look at him, her eyes followed the dark line of the forest, where the queen had vanished, where certainty had dissolved into shadow. She wiped her hands against her apron, the fabric darkened further with grease and dust, but she made no effort to clean it properly, and she did not reach for Teddy, or Thinksy. "I thought," she said quietly, "that I had to carry you, that if I let go, you would fall." Thinksy remained silent. As always, she listened. Not to solve, not to respond, but to allow the moment to finish speaking. Her hands rested at her sides, empty. For once, there was nothing he needed to build, nothing to explain. No one said "I'm sorry." An apology would have implied fault. What they understood instead was simpler and harder. They had survived by becoming what was required of them: protector, thinker, anchor. The roles had kept them upright when the world demanded rigidity. Now the world did not. Slowly, the awareness settled among them. Not as loss, but as release. They were no longer locked into a single movement, a single pattern of steps repeated out of fear. The old dance had broken, and in its place was something unfinished, something with room. If one were to walk around them, slowly, one would notice that the space between the three was not emptiness, it was generous. It allowed air to move freely, it allowed each of them to stand without leaning. They were no longer bound by necessity, they were choosing proximity, choosing to remain. The machine of forgetting lay silent at their feet, its power spent. Not destroyed by force, but by irrelevance. Around them, the dream worlds did not demand an answer. The land waited, patient and unafraid of uncertainty. For the first time since the eternal dance had fractured, the three stood not as a single mechanism, but as individuals sharing a moment, not because they had to, but because they wished to see what might come next, now that the steps were no longer prescribed.
Scene 2. A quiet agreement, danced without music.
For a while, none of them moved. The morning had begun without ceremony. The sky, almost unnoticed, had lightened at its edges. Pale warmth touched the broken square, softening shadows that had once seemed permanent. Thinksy was the first to recognize the change. For years, since the Queen's light dimmed, she would have been the one to raise her own. To summon light from thought, to replace uncertainty with invention. The motion lived in her muscles, ready. She did not make it. The light was already coming. She stepped forward instead, into the open center of their loose triangle. The ruins of the machine of forgetting lay behind her now, no longer demanding interpretation. She raised one hand. Not to grasp, not to pull, but to offer presence. Steps, she said slowly, as if tasting the word. We have forgotten them, the old steps. There was no regret in her voice, only clarity. Teddy looked at her, then laughed. Softly, briefly, a sound so rare it startled even him. Good, he said, they were clumsy anyway. The moment loosened something between them, not tension, exactly. Habit? Lucy shifted her weight. The dawn caught the dust on her apron, the wear in her sleeves, the hands that had held others upright for so long. She did not step forward immediately. She did not need to. We don't have to promise anything grand, she said at last. No forever, no vows that outlive their truth. She met their eyes, one after the other. Let's walk in the same direction, Lucy continued. As long as it still makes sense, that was all. No oath sealed the words, no binding rhythm wrapped itself around their agreement, and yet it settled among them with surprising strength. Honesty, offered freely, proved sturdier than obligation ever had. They stood there. 3 figures in the growing light, aware of each other without leaning. If there was a dance beginning, it did not announce itself. No melody guided their movements, no tempo demanded precision. There was only breath. In, out, somewhere nearby, a bird tested its voice. One uncertain note, then another. Not a song yet, just proof that sound could exist without instruction. This was still the dance of the eternal 3, but it was no longer a rehearsed performance. No eternal pattern looping itself into necessity. It was something looser now, something improvised, a step taken because it felt right, a pause allowed because it was needed, and as the sun climbed higher, the truth became gently undeniable. They were not dancing to remember who they had been, they were learning how to move, without being told, where the next step must fall.
Scene 3. Toward the unmapped morning.
They did not look back. The machine of forgetting remained where it was. Silent, broken, already receding into irrelevance. Whatever shadow Arkhon had once cast lingered only as an absence, no longer capable of shaping thought or direction. Without a word, the 3 turned away from it all. Before them, the dream worlds opened. The rigid stone of the square gave way to grass still heavy with dew, to wide meadows unfolding without fences or instructions. The horizon did not promise safety, it offered space. They stepped forward together, not in line, not in ranks, but abreast. Their movements did not synchronize, they were never meant to. Teddy walked with his familiar angularity. Steps precise, shoulders squared, as if still negotiating with the ground. Lucy moved with weight and certainty, each stride deliberate, steady, earned. Thinksy advanced lightly, almost skipping at times, her gait curious rather than efficient. There was no shared rhythm, and yet the disharmony held. It was honest. The rising sun reached them from the side, catching edges and contours, stretching their shadows long across the grass. The shadows did not loom, they anchored, proof that the figures casting them were solid, present. No longer half formed by myth or necessity, they walked on, the light brightened. Not by erasing what lay behind, but by making what lay ahead visible enough to enter. The world did not fade away, it clarified, and as the morning fully claimed the sky, a simple truth settled into the moment, quiet and complete. They were no longer moving to correct the past, nor to fulfill a design, they were moving because they could, and so they stepped into the morning, not as saviors, not as victims, but as themselves. The light continued to grow, until even the shadows softened, and the path ahead became less a direction than an invitation, one that did not demand an ending, only the courage, to keep walking.